please don't take the oath. I just begged her. She did not take it, but she took it later, and she tried to kill herself and was hospitalized and became permanently psychotic. And I saw her in 1970, and her mind was gone. She was not. She was, it destroyed her. And she said it was taking the acid had destroyed her. And she's on that list at the end of Scanner.
Hey, dickheads! Like a pink laser beam of truth beaming straight from the West Coast to your brain hole. We are ready to sell Bob Arctor our cystoscopes for $50 a piece here in San Diego, at least the three of us here. And we're going to talk about the Philip K. Dick masterpiece, A Scanner Darkly. And we have a special guest today, so we're going to start off there, and that is cyberpunk legend, cyberpunk patient zero, according to William Gibson, John Shirley. And John is Bram Stoker award-winning, Horror Guild award-winning legend who, has long been in this field. It was one of the people who threw objects at Harlan Ellison from a tree during Clarion. So welcome to the podcast, John.
All right, thank you. I actually threw my body at Harlan Ellison from the tree.
Well,
I did. I dropped on him from a tree. Which
is good, because I think he needs that sometimes.
Well, he was a bit dismayed by the whole thing. I mostly missed him. So
yeah. So let's talk about
a real life drop bear. I like it.
Now we brought you on to this particular episode for very specific reasons, which we'll get into eventually. John, we're going to talk specifically about some of your later works in relation to your relationship to this novel. But let's talk about some of the books that you have out recently, like the awesome The Voice of the Burning House and The Feverish Stars, which is an excellent collection that has an introduction from R.C. Matheson that is really great. And then you have a novel, Stormland, which was on my top 10 list of reads of last year. Can you tell us about your more recent books?
Well, there are those books. The Voice of the Burning House is a collection of poems, my first collection of poems, and also some of them are lyrics. And some of those lyrics were written for the Blue Oyster Cult and for Joe Bouchard, who used to be in the Blue Oyster Cult and now has his own band with Dennis Dunaway of Alice Cooper and Al Bouchard called Blue Coupe. And so he recorded some of them as songs. You can find one called She Is Legend by Joe Bouchard online. He did a little video for it and everything. And then those are all kind of in the cosmic horror mode. They're sort of like Clark Ashton Smith in feel, except somewhat modernized, and they're all in rhyming and verse form. There's kind of walk the line between ballads and poetry, and there is well, of course, Stormland is basically about a place in the United States that has in the future become permanently storm-ridden, is constantly afflicted by hurricanes and intense lightning storms, and one after another, day after day, year after year. And yet there are a few people still living there. And why? And there are strange things moving in the background. And it's sort of metaphor about the climate change extremes that we're moving into now. The Feverish Stars, the title is from a story about Lovecraft I wrote as a young man. H.P. Lovecraft as a young man when he literally has fever. He's ill from and when he's out on the beach he gets ill, and he starts to have visions that we might relate to his point of view of cosmic horror. But the book is just a collection of the stories that have not been collected by me before, all of which have some kind of interconnecting theme, whether they're science fiction or horror or social commentary. So those are the three big things that are out right now. Although I will just mention quickly, early this year sometime, Jack and Apes Press that did the poetry collection is bringing out a new version of my story collection, really, 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 really weird stories. And that book is also now available as an ebook.
Yeah, and Dan at Jack
and I mention it because it is a lot of Dickian influence in some of the stories. You know, the undermining of reality comes up a lot, and then shocking revelations about the nature of reality and so on.
Yeah, that sounds great. And if people want more details on Stormland, I did an interview with you that's here on this podcast. They can scroll back and get more details where we went really intensely into that book. All right, so let's get into the bones of this show. Let's start with PKD News. Of course, he's still not with us, so that's part of the
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And but we do have two pieces of PKD News, which is the finalists for the Philip K. Dick Award have been announced. And I'm currently reading one of the nominees, which is Far from the Light of Heaven by Tade Thompson. And that is so far 230 pages in. It's a great sci-fi murder.
I hear that's the front runner right now.
Yeah, that's the rumor, and it's really good. It's a sleeper ship where the captain wakes up and 30 of the people sleeping on the ship have been murdered and partially eaten. And the only other one I want to mention of the nominees is The Escapist by Lavi Tidar, who was a guest on our show talking about his excellent World Fantasy Award-winning novel, Osama, which, of course, I want to recommend people go back and listen to that episode, read that book, Osama. It's incredible. One of the best books influenced by Man in the High Castle. So, Osama. And that's the last thing I'm going to say about that. You can look. We'll have the nominees in the show notes, so you can look at all those titles. And I'm working my way through them, and hopefully we'll read them all. And I only have one other piece of PKD news. And this shouldn't be PKD News, but if you search PKD News, one of the highest things that comes up is that Keanu Reeves, in an interview, just said, "I really liked reading Philip K. Dick," and it became a news item. And he also said that he liked listening to GBH and The Exploited. So I wanted to mention that as well, too. So this book was published in 1977.
David, what was going on there in 1977?
Well, the first flight of the very first space shuttle happened in 1977.
Did it?
We lost Elvis at age 42. And I think these two things are...
Well, we didn't lose him. We know exactly where he was. He was in the toilet.
He was on the toilet.
Right. But I think this is serious because we talked about Elvis being the number one hit when World Jones came out.
Right. Yeah.
And we've done a lot of these, like pointing out where the PKD, this was his 25th year as a novelist. So just look at how the space program changed from Solar Lottery to Scatter Darkly, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Sputnik hadn't even gone up yet when Solar Lottery came out, and now we've got a space shuttle. So a lot happened in the world. So that's...
Well, you can see that progression in PKD's writing, where the planets become less utopias and more, these deserts, worthless places where people are struggling to survive.
Yeah.
In short, like they really would be, probably, in most cases.
Yeah.
Well, and I do know that PKD told Rickman he didn't even know how many planets there were in the solar system. I do want to point out, just for the fun of it, that one of the things I learned from reading Rickman's book is that Philip K. Dick's favorite drink is Orange Crush. And he actually specifically said that he drank so many Orange Crushes that his literary agent at one time told him he needed to cut back. So, folks, I am going to drink Orange Crush in honor.
Haven't you never had a soda in your life or something?
No, I drank a lot of soda. I just don't drink a lot of them.
Oh, yes. No caffeine. That's the thing, right? None.
Oh, no, I'm on caffeine now. So.
Oh, are you?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, slipping. David's slipping.
Well, I like tea. I like tea a lot. So, Orange Crush for Phil. But let's talk about...
Yeah,
that's pure sugar right there. That is 100% sugar.
Yeah, it should be injected, really.
Yeah, right.
All right, now the sad parts. So, as always, we have to consult Divorcepedia.
What year?
Let me first
did he write it?
Well, let's first get out of the way the absolute details of that. This was written after a suicide attempt, and like a serious one, and a long bout of not writing. He had written Flow, the first draft of Flow, but had not really gotten to it in a long time. But the last thing he worked on before this was collecting the Book of PKD collection. So he did an editing pass on that, and the next thing he wrote after this was the Ubik screenplay for the French production company. The planning and writing of this happened mostly February 20th to April 2nd of 1973. However, he outlined the book in 1971, but we'll get to that. He turned it in to Doubleday and Ballantine. He had a paper book and hardcover deal for this book before it was finished.
A Scanner Darkly?
Yes.
So he wrote the outline in 71, that early. That's interesting.
Yes, and
I'm amazed it was outlined.
Yeah.
But, I never thought he wrote that way.
Well, he did, but he often didn't follow them. He wrote lots of outlines. If you read that, I have the outline for Death of the Anti-Watcher, which became Ubik, and you can see like the first couple chapters, he's following the outline, and then he's like, "Fuck it." It's like, nowhere near.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, and then so he somehow got a deal with both the Doubleday. He was already working with them and done Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and done Deus Irae and all that. So he had a deal, and he sold based on the outline. He sold to Doubleday. Oh, and they did Flow too. But what's really interesting is that he sold the paperback rights to Ballantine and Judy Del Rey at the same time. And actually, Judy Del Rey had more of a hand in the editing than Doubleday did. So the first edition came out from Doubleday in January 77, and they followed it 6 weeks later with the Science Fiction Book Club edition. And then the Ballantine paperback came out in December, so all in 1 year. And then the first UK edition came out that November, so he had a deal to print it in the UK and in Europe in the same year. So he had some pretty good deals going with Scanner Darkly, and I think most of the editors, publishers, knew they had something really good going on. So, Anthony, the first PKD quote.
Working all those years on Flow My Tears, doing all those drafts, changed my work habits. I'd never done more than a rough draft and a final on a novel before, and there was 11 drafts. God, I was reshaping it word by word. Once in, never out. I couldn't go back to doing a rough draft and a final draft just like that. So the next novel was A Scanner Darkly, and it took years to write Scanner. It just took years. The idea came to me in the early part of 1972, and it wasn't until 1976 that I sent the manuscript off to Doubleday. And I wasn't trying to say what was real. I was just no longer able to dash off the stuff at the rate that I had before.
Now, he did send earlier drafts to agents. So, and then we have the next quote, number 2. Is from a letter to Nancy and Issa that was written in April of 73, I believe.
After sending the novel, Flow My Tears, to my agent, I started another one, Scanner Darkly. A 62-page outline, 82 final pages to mail to accompany the outline for submissions, 240 pages more in rough. Add that up for a period from February 20 to April 2nd, and how many pages of writing do you get? A fatal stoke. That's what. Is that a typo? I'm pretty sure it meant stroke.
Yeah.
A fatal stroke. Well,
A fatal stone.
There you go, John. You mentioned stroke right there.
Yeah.
So his writing style was different on this. He spent a lot of time working various versions of it. Do you guys think? I think you can tell the difference between this novel and some of the earlier ones. How much care he was putting into doing.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Absolutely.
Way more true to life than.
Yeah, sure. It was grounded in the real world in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, according to my notes, it appears that the first time SMLA, his literary agency, saw a full draft, was April 1973. Okay. Doubleday had already bought Flow, and they had sent the 62-page outline, and apparently Doubleday bought the novel based on the 62-page outline. So they trusted him enough from the outline.
Yeah, see, the outline was probably more organized in some ways, but writers submit outlines more to just get an advance than that they can live on, than to actually provide any kind of a armature for writing.
Now,
so you're saying that they don't necessarily write the outline, but they use the outline as a way to write something else.
Oh, I'm saying they use it as a way to get a check.
Yeah.
I mean it. That's what. I've for years I've had to do it, but I don't stick to the outline.
Right.
All right, Anthony, number 3.
But with Scanner, it's all bite, all grit. It's a great tragic anti-dope novel, an autobiographical account set as science fiction of what I saw in the dope world, the counterculture, during the 2 years after my wife and daughter left me. I believe nothing in fiction matches it in the hell it portrays.
Yeah, he's during this phase, he was very confident in this novel. You'll see. Yeah. We have other quotes where he's pretty high on it. He feels pretty good about it. And
as well he should. It's a great novel. But.
Yeah, I think he knew. I don't know if anybody has anything else on that. Everybody knows that this is his anti-dope novel and that he took it that way and that he considered it that. So, Anthony, number 4.
But on the drug thing, what happened was that after my wife Nancy left me in 1970, I was in a state of complete desolation and despair, and suicidally depressed because I really loved her. She took my little girl with her, who I also really loved, and I didn't see my little girl I saw her only once in a whole year, just for a few minutes. I got mixed up with a lot of street people, just to have somebody to fill the house, so she left me with a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house and nobody living in it but me. So I just filled it with street people, and I got mixed up with a lot of people who were into drugs. But that was for a period of just about a year. And I think, and then I just took amphetamines. I've never even taken hard drugs, but I was in a position to see what hard drugs did to people, what drugs did to my friends.
So amphetamines are light.
Are light drugs. Yeah.
He actually took Darvon at least one time. He's had experience of opiates, but he was never into them.
Yeah,
just like he was with LSD. He took it a couple of times, but never enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I think that's something I think he really did get that right in this book. As somebody who, as some people know, both my parents were drug dealers and both suffered from addiction. And this whole idea of just filling your house with random people so you don't feel lonely. Yeah. It's
so true.
That is, there was new people in our house every day. So I think he really got that nailed down.
Except in my case, I was the random person in somebody else's house.
Oh, so you were at my house, John.
I was at your house.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and so this next quote is from an April 73 letter to John Slandeck, who, we've mentioned on the podcast before, who ended up being the guy who finished on Lies Inc. for Phil after his death.
Okay.
And so number 5 is in a letter to John Slandeck, who's
Sladek.
Sladek. Oh, of course I pronounced it wrong. I'm terrible with names, so everybody knows that. Number 5, the letter to Sladek.
Sure. Everything in A Scanner Darkly I actually saw. I mean, I saw even worse things than I put in A Scanner Darkly. I saw people who were reduced to a point where they couldn't complete a sentence. They really couldn't state a sentence. And this was permanent. This was for the rest of their lives. young people. These are people maybe 18 and 19. And I just saw, it was a vision of hell. And I vowed to write a novel about it sometime. And I was I was in love with a girl who was an addict and I didn't know she was an addict. And it was just pathetic. So I wrote A Scanner Darkly.
Yeah. And then I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that one.
Well, I don't find that realistic.
What part?
I've been around people that have done tons and tons of drugs. No one's ever ended up with permanent psychosis that I know. Dead, yes, but permanent psychosis without an underlying condition has never happened, as far as my experience.
I've seen it happen, but it is not that common. And some brain damage can be pretty common. It also depends on the drugs.
Yeah.
There's some pretty serious shit out there, designer drugs now and so on too.
But he's not. I mean, he's talking about basic, sort of the basic drugs as far as we're concerned, right? It's super high levels of amphetamine. Some people can get pretty damaged by them, but nobody took more than Lou Reed. Sure.
And after Lou gave up amphetamines, probably it took him like 4 tries because amphetamines have a very high recidivism, a very high relapse rate.
Mm-hmm.
After he gave them up for good, he was completely coherent and together. So
it's the same with my mom. My mom was
right.
She was a crystal addict for a long time, and she was totally insane when she was on the drugs.
Right.
Afterwards,
Way to out Bob.
The majority of people can recover if they take care of themselves. So. Mm-hmm. People should not get discouraged and think, "Oh, I'm totally screwed. I can never recover. I might as well keep taking the drug." No, you can recover most of the time. Most people will be able to recover.
True.
Yep.
Yeah, and I do think it's hard because we've heard so many exaggerations, and we know Tessa has told us 100 times, like Phil exaggerated all the time, and then he was a chronic exaggerator. So it's hard to but at the same time,
I mean, it could be hyperbolic. There's a lot of tragedy when you're in those drug circles.
Yeah, but also he was a writer, and writers dramatize in their lives sometimes if they're not careful.
Right.
And if you're wired, you're not careful.
Yeah, right.
All right, Slaydeck, in that April 73 letter, there's more. Number 6 there, Anthony.
In my second Sail to Doubleday this month novel, A Scanner Darkly, I have gone into new depths of what is reality that no one ever before imagined could be posed as a question, let alone answered. It is a furiously anti-dope novel, and I spent all of 1971 doing first-hand research for it, although I did not know this at the time. I just thought I was turning on with all my friends. But toward the start of 1972, I woke up one day and noticed that all my friends either were dead, had burned out brains, were psychotic, or all of the above. Then I fled to Canada, and later on here to Fullerton, which is close to Disneyland. You won't believe how screwed up reality is actually, John, until you read Scanner. I had no idea myself. Anyhow, writing the novel almost killed me, and reading it almost killed little Tessa, my wife. It's a very sad novel, and very sad things happen to very good people.
Right. I think that's a really powerful quote.
Well, I don't think he writes exceptionally good people in this, but I understand his point. I mean, they don't seem like really good people to begin with.
I don't know if we get to know them outside of who they are while under the influence.
When you finally find out what Donna is really about, she's actually a good person who's stuck in her role.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she has so much self-hatred about it too.
Yes.
Now,
but speaking of Lou Reed, there's prior to any of this being written or anything was the fight between William S. Burroughs and Lou Reed about Lou Reed glorifying heroin when Burroughs was constantly saying, you don't want to do it. You have to be rich to be an addict.
Yeah.
And they had this huge fight about this. I mean, that was the biggest, as far as I know, back in that time, that was the biggest battle of drugs was between those two iconic people.
Great creative art, great artists. And Lou's song Heroin can sound kind of like it was extolling heroin, but in fact, it was just a sort of short story deep in the point of view of the reason people become heroin addicts. And and kind of the state of mind. So he was
that initial
he was a writer. He was like a storyteller. And so that's what it's always like in his things. It's not an endorsement. And if it's very like kind of, in a way, what the actual, to me, theme of A Scanner Darkly is, the song Heroine by Lou Reed. It's about like people are struggling to deal with their own personal reality and their life's dilemmas and the world around them, suffering, so they turn to drugs. Right. And they're not, and that aspect of it is not appreciated enough, as Phil says later in the afterword to the book.
But I also say, Dick claiming that he's written the epitome of drug books. I mean, there's already junkie out there. There's all kinds of.
There's more coming on.
Diary of a Drug Addict.
Yeah. There is, but he takes it to new levels, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that's worth discussing for sure. We'll get there, that's for sure.
Okay, so the next quote, it's from an interview. I can't quite remember which interview, but this is where we get into, in the early stages of trying to sell this book, Phil really thought so highly of this book. He felt kind of insulted that Doubleday offered him the same amount for this that they did for Flow My Tears and Deus Irae, because he thought he had something, and so he almost pulled it from Doubleday at one point and was but anyways, we'll get into, so here's quote number 7. He talks about it here.
Strap in, it's long. I'm about to do my Aaron Sorkin monologue. It started to bother me finally when I wrote my anti-dope book, A Scanner Darkly, and I realized I'd written a really great novel. Actually, I had finally written a true masterpiece after 25 years of writing, and my agent wrote back when he read the first part, and he said, "You're absolutely right. This is exceptional material." And then he went out and sold it to Doubleday for the same old goddamn 2,000. By that time, they were up to 2,500. Still Mickey Mouse money. Here's this masterpiece, and we're going to pay you 2,500 for it. And I fired my agent. I prepared to buy the manuscript back from Doubleday, and I could never raise the money to buy it back from them. I couldn't get enough cash to buy it back. And Simon & Schuster offered to buy it from Doubleday for $4,000. So I'd get a little more money, Larry Ashmead having then gone to Simon & Schuster. But Doubleday refused to relinquish it. They said $3,000 was their limit for science fiction, and then they admitted $4,000 was their limit. And then they turned around with A Scanner Darkly and turned it over to their trade department to sell it as a trade book. And there is no limit in the advance to a trade book, so they weren't limited to $3,000. And they've got a masterpiece, and they put out almost no money at all. So, the next book then, I sold to Bantam for $12,000, and Doubleday was just out of luck. Doubleday said on the phone very bitterly, "You're mercenary." And I said, "No, I have to eat. I have to live."
It's about being a writer.
Yeah. That's what we have here. I owe the IRS $4,700. I can't afford to sell you a novel for $3,000, and of course, I especially couldn't if I could sell it to Bantam for $12,000. I never really got angry until this book, A Scanner Darkly. I knew the book was worth a great deal of money. I knew that it really was a fine book, and I worked 5 years on it, and I knew that I was being gypped. It was the first time in 22 or 23 years that I really realized I was being terribly gypped. Just gangbanged is what it was.
Okay, so at the end we get a little gangbanging, but...
That's what I'm going to say every time I'm getting screwed over now. You guys are really gangbanging me here.
Well, this was a science fiction writer who'd been one for decades, 25 years anyway, and wanting to break out of the ghetto of science fiction. And that's why he was writing a lot of attempts at mainstream novels. But he couldn't quite ever break out of the ghetto. And the pay that he was getting for Doubleday was the ghetto pay for science fiction.
Well, this novel certainly does rise above that ghetto level.
I think so too.
It's so realistic in a lot of its portrayals that, I mean, it should have been taken more seriously.
It should have been published for the mainstream. It should not have been published as a science fiction novel. I mean, it should have been published like The Handmaid's Tale.
Right, something like that.
Yeah. I think he has a point here. There's sometimes where
fantastic, but it's not out. It's not so far out of reality.
No, right.
Yeah. And we'll get in. So here, there's some comments with when Judy Del Rey gets involved in the editing. So number 8, Anthony.
They're going to make a bundle on it, but Ballantine deserves to make a bundle on it because Judy Lynn Del Rey at Ballantine went over the manuscript page by page with me and told me what it needed in order to be a truly competent book. This is the first time that any editor has ever done that with me since The Man in the High Castle.
So,
well, and also I know Tessa had a lot to do with the writing of this one as well. She was there with him every day and doing notes, and she even says she wrote a couple of sections in there. I don't know what specifically, but there was a lot. He got a lot of help, it appears, on this novel.
yeah. Now there's another quote here from number 9, Anthony. And then we'll talk about the Judy Del Rey thing after this one.
Judy Lynn Del Rey is probably the greatest editor since Maxwell Perkins. She showed me how to create a character. I've been selling novels for 22 years, and she showed me how to develop a character. My first reaction was, "Dear Judy Lynn, how would you like to take a one-way walk off the Long Beach Pier?" But then I started thinking about what she was saying, and soon as my fuse had burned out, being very short, it didn't take long, I realized that she was teaching me how to write. It's too bad that nobody did that 25 years ago, because then maybe my books would have made more sense. But A Scanner Darkly, a master craftsman came into that book. Judy Lynn Del Rey. Now I know what to do when I write a book. You don't just write whatever comes into your head while you're sitting there in front of the typewriter.
There's a concept.
You say you got to think about it.
Yeah, there's a process. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh my God, a process. Well, yeah.
Now
But I wish I'd had her as an editor myself.
No doubt.
So this idea that she taught him how to write characters is very interesting to me.
Well, yeah, and we've talked about it for 30 books that his characters are often flat and stuff like that. The female characters don't have any agency and all those things we've said for so many books.
Yeah, the main is a bumbling sad sack that's really annoying at times. Yeah.
Yeah. And we know that one of the ways that Judy Del Rey kind of influenced the book too was that she tried, much like Don Wollheim, to say like, hey, this book, one of the letters she said, hey, this book takes place in 1994, in the far off future of 1994. And you have all these people talking like 60s drugsters. She's like, I want you to invent new lingo and dialogue so it can be more futuristic. And they actually had a whole discussion, apparently on the phone, where he said, no, I want it to feel like the 60s, even though it's set in 1994. For Phil, like, this is a clear indication that to him, this was this alternate, weird 60s, 90s.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is that, David, you've been driving this point home. I mean, ad infinitum, really.
I have
for the past like 10, 15 novels. Is that he wants it not to be
the future,
our reality, our future. This is an alternate reality that he's writing about.
Yeah.
And once I got that in my head, this book made more sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it had already made sense, but it just felt better knowing that it's just an alternate.
It's an alternate reality that comments on our our reality.
And in that way, it's far more clever than just being sort of a set in the future kind of thing.
And it's clear that the only two things that are different about this reality in real ways are, well, three things. The scramble suit, Substance D, and the scanners inside the apartment. Really.
Yeah, it's just
there's like 1,100 Planet of the Apes movies.
Yes, there's a bunch of Planet of the Apes movies, and they're played at the drive-in. Yes. And so we have one last quote that may be a little over the top about how Phil felt about this novel.
I felt I had written a novel equal to All Quiet on the Western Front. I felt that what All Quiet on the Western Front was to war, that anybody that read it would never pick up a rifle as long as they lived, that anybody who ever read A Scanner Darkly would never drop dope as long as they lived. And in it, I had all my friends who are now dead or crazy from dope, sitting around laughing and talking. Then they all go crazy and die. It broke my heart to read it. It broke my heart to do the galleys. I did the galleys 2 weeks ago, and I cried for 2 days after I did the galleys. Every time I read it, I cry.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We know this is
because it's his story.
Yeah.
It's his
Yeah.
life in a lot of ways.
And of course, it's going to mean a lot more to him than it is to a casual reader.
We know that Phil has done this before. He had Ray Nelson do the proofs for Three Stigmata because he couldn't bring himself to read Three Stigmata.
Yeah.
For the proofs, and you know, and they were roommates at the time, so it's pretty easy to just be like, "Hey Ray, can you do this?" But you know, there's times where he just doesn't want to go back to them. So
no, it's reliving a bunch of bad times. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
All right, I think we're done with the writing and publication history of this. Larry.
Yep.
It's your turn, dude.
To do what?
Story. It's the story breakdown. All right. You ready to start your book report?
I think so. All right, so here we go with my book report on A Scanner Darkly, which is a book by Philip K. Dick. And it's good. There's my review. So just so you know, for the future, that's my review. It's good. What we have here is a cop story. So in the beginning, we meet Donna, and we meet, was it Fabian? Yeah, we meet Fabian.
Jerry Fabian.
We meet Jerry Fabian first, and he talks about aphids, and then we meet Charles Frack, who helps with the aphids, and then meets Donna, and they talk about Arthur, who is our main character there. Bob Arthur, aka Fred, aka Bruce. So the story is that Fred is a police officer, undercover, trying to bust big-time drug dealers, preferably the ones transporting drugs into our country, specifically this stuff called death, slow death. It has a couple of names. It's a big time drug. So you can shoot it, you can pop it. Well, what's the Jim Carroll? If you're gonna snort it, you might as well pop it. If you're gonna pop it, you might as well shoot it. It's a big time drug, and being undercover in this world means that Fred has to take the drug. So we can already see that Fred has started to turn against his cop ways when he has to do a meeting with the Lions Club, and he hates all the people in the room. Anyway, so we find out that Fred in his suit, what is the suit called? The space suit? The
Scramble suit.
Scramble suit. No one can see who Fred is. And that's sort of a metaphor for Fred because he can't see really who he is. But he turns out to be this Bob Arthur character who seems like a normal guy, just takes an occasional drug every once in a while, lives in a house with a couple of weirdo drug addicts people. There's Jim Barris and Ernie Luckman. Ernie Luckman likes to drink a lot. He's sort of a big guy. Barris is a very, very odd, conniving weasel type person who is not to be trusted. And Bob also is in love with this girl, Donna, who looks exactly like Winona Ryder for some reason. I don't know why. But he starts to struggle with whether being a cop is worthwhile or whether he should be a drug addict. And his bosses notice this and make him take some tests to see if he's cognitively sound. And it doesn't go so well, that first test. And his boss, who is Hank, who we don't know who Hank is, also wearing a scramble suit. Hank is telling him that he needs to follow this dude, Bob Arthur. He tells Fred he needs to follow Bob Arthur, who, Fred is Bob Arthur, but here's when we get into it, is when Fred decides that he needs to watch Bob Arthur, and sort of has this disconnect between who he is on the drug side and who he is on the cop side. And the further he gets into it, the further we see that it's the drug causing him to have this separation. And while Fred has great ideas, he says, I'm going to go to my dealer, Donna, and I'm going to buy 1,000 tabs, and 1,000 tabs should be too much for her to sell to me, but she does sell it to him for reasons that we'll find out down the line. But it could have been more, it could have been less. The number doesn't matter. But what we find out is that he doesn't take that stuff like he should down to the police locker, stick it in evidence. He sticks it under his mattress. And where does that drug end up? I think we know where it ends up. It ends up inside of Bob Arthur. And so he's drifting further away from himself. And this is the key to the novel, is that he's becoming two separate people. His brain, the hemispheres of his brain, and some sort of wackadoodle biological science turns him into a dual personality through taking this drug. And Fred the cop comes to hate Bob Arthur the drug addict and totally disassociates. And when he has to take these cognitive tests a second time, they straight up tell him, hey, you're two people. You're seeing from this side of things, you're seeing from the reality side of things, and from the back of reality side of things. So Fred decides, oh, you know what? I don't think they're telling me the truth. I think I know what's going on. And I think I know what I need to do. And so he feels like he's got to bear down on Barris and figure out what that guy's all about. And he knows Arthur is sort of the center of attention, but doesn't understand why, because really he doesn't do anything. Arthur is sort of so plain and ordinary as far as drug addicts are concerned. He's confused why he's the center of attention, but he knows that he hates that guy. But he realizes that Barris is a psychotic and that something has to be done about this guy. And before he can do anything, Barris comes into the police station with evidence against Bob Arthur, claiming that he is part of a international terrorist ring bent on destroying the United States as we know it, along with his cohort, his partner, Donna Hawthorne. And so we find out that's obviously none of that is true. But the point of Bob Arthur being the center of attention was actually to find out whether Barris was an insane lunatic bent on the destruction of the United States or not. And he is. So that's basically the story, is that, even though Fred loses his mind, Bob Arthur becomes nothing. Fred becomes nothing. He gets his man in the end, even though he was tricked into it. That's sort of the end of the novel. Donna takes him to drug rehab, and he's totally out of it. And the end. Then there's a coda, a 35-page coda, that is basically a short story about a different character altogether, who has loose ties to Bob Arthur and Fred. And it's about the drug theft and how Donna's plan as an agent of the government is to find out where it comes from. And Bob being destroyed becomes part of that plan. And he ends up finding the drug. In the end, it's grown in the U.S. And then the book ends with the assumption that they're going to take down the drug company.
Wow, I didn't think it was separate. I didn't really.
And then there's an afterword.
I didn't feel that way about the coda. But anyways,
that's my opinion. But that's what you get when you When you do the breakdown, you get my opinion.
That's right.
But that's pretty much the end.
All right. Now we're going to talk about the afterword next. Is there anything you wanted to say, Larry, before John reads it to us?
I'm probably going to disagree with everything everybody says.
I agree with that. Okay, I'll just read this author's note, or at least much of it. Author's note written by Philip K. Dick at the end of A Scanner Darkly. This has been a novel about some people who were punished entirely too much for what they did. They wanted to have a good time, but they were like children playing in the street. They could see one after another of them being killed, run over, maimed, destroyed, but they continued to play anyhow. We really all were very happy for a while, sitting around, not toiling, but just bullshitting and playing. But it was for such a terrible brief time, and then the punishment was beyond belief. Even when we could see it, we could not believe it. For example, while I was writing this, I learned that the person on whom the character Jerry Fabin is based killed himself. My friend, on whom I based the character Ernie Luckman, died before I began the novel. For a while, I myself was one of these children playing in the street. I was like the rest of them, trying to play instead of being grown up, and I was punished. I am on the list below, which is a list of those to whom this novel is dedicated, and what became of each. Drug misuse is not a disease, it is a decision, like the decision to step out in front of a moving car. You would call that not a decision, but an error in judgment. When a bunch of people begin to do it, it is a social error, a lifestyle. In this particular lifestyle, the motto is, be happy now because tomorrow you are dying. But the dying begins almost at once, and the happiness is a memory. It is then only a speeding up and intensifying of the ordinary human existence. It is not different from your lifestyle, it is only faster. It all takes place in days or weeks or months instead of years. Take the cash and let the credit go, as Villon said in 1460. But that is a mistake if the cash is a penny and the credit a whole lifetime. There is no moral in this novel. It is not bourgeois. It does not say they were wrong to play when they should have toiled. It just tells what the consequences were. In Greek drama, they were beginning as a society to discover science, which means causal law. Here in this novel, there is nemesis, not fate, because any one of us could have chosen to stop playing in the street. But as I narrate from the deepest part of my life and heart, a dreadful nemesis for those who kept on playing. I myself am not a character in this novel. I am the novel. So though was our entire nation at this time. The novel is about more people than I knew personally. Some we all read about in the newspapers. It was this sitting around with our buddies and bullshitting while making tape recordings, the bad decision of the decade, the 60s, both in and out of the establishment, and nature cracked down on us. We were forced to stop by things dreadful. If there was any sin, it was that these people wanted to keep on having a good time forever and were punished for that. But as I say, I feel that if so, the punishment was far too great. And I prefer to think of it only in a Greek or morally neutral way, as mere science, as deterministic, impartial cause and effect. I love them all. Here is the list to whom I dedicate my love. And then there's a pretty extensive list of people who were badly affected by drugs in his life. In memoriam, he says, there were comrades whom I had. These were comrades whom I had, but there are no better. They remain in my mind, and the enemy will never be forgiven. The enemy was their mistake in playing. Let them all play again in some other way, and let them be happy. That's his afterword coda to the novel.
I think that should have been a foreword, personally, but...
Well, I can kind of understand. He'd rather let the novel speak for itself, but he wanted to make a few things clear at the end. And he,
To me, it's a long
people who
dedication.
struggle with recovery have to find their own way of expressing things.
Yeah, that's true.
I have some notes, and one of them relates to the fact that I had some issues with rereading this book again, because the only other time I read it was when it came out in the 70s. And I tried a few psychedelics then, but no hard drugs. In the 80s, I got into and out of hard drugs, experimenting with meth and cocaine and a few times heroin, shooting cocaine and heroin and so on. Then I got away from it, was clean and sober for some years. But then I had a relapse it was worse than my previous drug use. I relapsed in the 90s, and I got caught up in some horrible drug scenes. I just saw terrible things out there. I mean, crack house stuff.
Yeah.
With really bad effects on my life and on my career. I got clean again. I had a few more brief relapses, and then I was done. I've been done ever since with hard drugs, and it's been decades. But what I saw out there and what I experienced left me with actual PTSD. And his description of hard drugs and the peculiar states they slag you into is so evocative. I was almost having flashbacks. It's all very real. And Phil Dick said in an interview that everything in the novel, in terms of drug behavior, he actually saw in person when he was in that scene. And I could see the novel's character Barris in myself to an extent, not that bad, but something like that.
Well, I hope not.
And Freck and people I knew. And the maze, one of the things that's great in the book is the maze-like interlocking of the minds of people on cocaine and speed and other drugs, substance D. Dick evokes that in an unsettling way. And it takes me frighteningly to being back in those mazes. To the reinforcing of delusion that is engaged in by people high on amphetamines and cocaine. They kind of work together unconsciously to reinforce each other's delusions. And I wrote my novel Wet Bones as a supernatural horror novel about addiction while I was in recovery from a relapse many years ago. And that book is very into the dark vision of the phenomenon, a sort of flip side from Dick's version. His is science fictional. Mine is more supernatural or spiritual. So it was hard for me to get through rereading it, but it's a brilliant book. And I'm struck by certain things. Freck and his bugs paranoia really sets the scene at the beginning.
Yeah.
And a bad scene, man. It's a condition called it's a real condition called delusional parasitosis, and it's reminiscent of so-called Morgellons disease. And the Morgellons, you can look it up on Wikipedia. That delusion has been cropping up in recent years in our time. People think they've got some kind of parasite. They're scratching their skin bloody, and then what happens is bits of ordinary clothing thread, just little tiny pieces of clothing thread that's inside our houses all the time. We just don't notice it. It becomes part of dust bunnies or something.
Right.
These things kind of make a little snow on us in real life, and they fall into the holes that people scratch in themselves, and the people fixate on those, and they see these little threads, and they say, I do have a weird parasite. Look, it's this thread. And every time anybody analyzes the thread, it's always cotton or something. And I believe that in most cases, the people afflicted with this decision have been abusing high levels of amphetamines.
Yeah.
Which is another connection to a scanner darkly drug delusions.
Well, and John, it should be said that one of the reasons why I wanted you on this episode is because you wrote Wet Bones. And, Wet Bones, Wet Bones it's kind of your scanner darkly.
I want to say something about the scramble suits. And it's one of his wonderful ideas that he just tosses in. People have been mining these little ideas that he throws in his novels for years and years and borrowing them, like the movie Bugs, for example, by William Friedkin. I'm convinced it was borrowed from A Scanner Darkly. It's just taking sections of it and then putting them in
Yeah, it was done
somebody
very
else's
well,
condition. But it was not about drugs. It was just about states of mind, and paranoia. But people are always borrowing things from him. And Dick's science fiction scramble suit, worn by narcs, it projects this constant churn of random images of men and women, right? So one personhood blurs into another, imagistically speaking. The image is drawn from millions of people. And to me, that's a double metaphor. The suit is a metaphor for the fact that a drug agent, a narc, according to Phil Dick, is not any definite human being. It's not that he's subhuman or anything, but he's not a definite human being. They've given up their individual humanity to represent some kind of negative, highly judgmental social consensus. And so the scramble suits are a blur of personhood. You can project anything on them, but they also represent the angry presence of straight society looking down at the drug user. Because all those all those people, all society appears on it. Flick, flick, flick. Another face, another face, another face.
They're an infiltrator. They're not themselves, but they're not necessarily anything less than a person.
Right. Well, they're not. No. But it symbolizes that, I think. And there's a third metaphor in the scramble suit. They represent the shell we all put on, the various versions of selves we project outward to protect ourselves. We all have a secret self hidden away under this protective illusion that represented by the scramble suit. Yeah, I mean, when Fred Archer was lecturing, as you mentioned, he goes there in a scramble suit and he has a sort of meltdown, and he says, "This is what gets people on these drugs, this disgustingness." And he was talking about the meeting itself and the talk and everything he was doing, and
the way society views things,
and yes, and also just the the kind of condition that society sets up that is inimical to people feeling safe, because we're always being caught off guard and forced into new shapes by the march of commerce, and by expectations and by religions and social institutions, and we have to this feeling of desperation comes, and fear, and people start taking drugs.
But that's what ties back into the author's note, is that he's saying these people just want to have a good time, and society views that as criminal.
Yes.
Wanting to have a good time is criminal.
And everything in this novel is its opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Narcs are drug addicts. Drug addicts are narking.
Mm-hmm.
Archer is a spy spying on himself. Rehab in the form of New Path is actually a source of substance D. Yeah. So the rehab place is a source of the drug that people are trying to get rehab from. Substance D is hidden in these harmless crops, at the New Path farms. And also the opposites of the right brain struggles with the left brain. That is a big theme.
That big dichotomy between the two.
The dichotomy of the right and left brain. The left brain struggles to intervene in the right brain.
So, John, Anthony pointed this out to me earlier, is that in the author's note, he said drug misuse is not a disease, it is a decision. And then he goes on to basically create an oxymoron by saying it's not their fault at the same time as it is their fault for making that decision.
Well, it's complex. I mean, he's saying you can make a decision.
So does that fit into the rest of the theme of the dichotomous?
Yes. I mean, it is. Yeah, it is. Because it is a decision and it's not a decision at the same time. It's a lot of people really, it's like seem like their only alternative. There are children on little children, really pretty small, on the streets of Panama City, for example, and in Rio de Janeiro, in the slums, and there's a whole syndrome of these little tiny children being addicted to glue sniffing, and they're very impoverished, and people around them get shot a lot, and they're terrified and they're ignorant, and this is the only thing that takes them out of themselves, even if it makes them sick at the same time. At least it's someplace else, and that's kind of what's going on with Substance D.
He also mentions babies in the book, where he says that there's, bad parents feeding their children drugs.
Yeah.
And it almost reflects what happened during the crack epidemic, when children were born
right, and exposed to, and sometimes exposed to crack smoke, which had a bad effect on them, and just generally impacted by it. Absolutely, I could tell you horror stories, but I won't. I don't want to rethink. I don't want to rethink some of the things I saw. I don't want to revisit that. But and now people are often wrongly prescribing drugs against ADHD. Is that if I got it right?
Yeah, that's definitely one of them. That's they basically prescribe amphetamines for ADHD, but
most of the time it's not something that the kid really needs. It's just the kid has a personality that confuses them. Well, that's what kids do, and the kid is having some trouble getting traction.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes there is a form of medication that really does help some of the more extreme cases, but they're oftentimes giving it when they don't need to, and they're doing things like they're letting their teenage daughters use Botox. Really, this is a syndrome now. That doesn't make any sense at all. But they're like, oh, but I started to have a wrinkle, mama, and and it's like, I just don't like this perfectly natural line that they've always had, like here, perhaps under their eyes. So they Botox it. I mean, that's sick, and so these things go on where we're kind of bombarding people with options that they don't that are actually a trap of some kind.
Well, Anthony, you grew up in the central time of Ritalin being prescribed to. You must have had friends that were constantly on Ritalin and all those ADHD techniques that they were using in that during the late 90s and stuff like that. Did that affect the way you viewed your peers or anything like that?
Nah, not really. I grew up, like I said, with my parents, so drugs were always just there. So to me, other people being on a different type of drug, kind of not the
almost
the norm.
Reassuring. Almost reassuring.
Yeah. I had one experience where I was given, I forget what the Prozac to treat depression, and I got really dizzy and vomited. So I kind of don't. I have no experience beyond that with those. Yeah, I have friends that were on Ritalin, but I also kind of wonder how many times a day they actually took what they were supposed to take, and if they weren't just selling them to each other.
Yeah, right. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens too. Yes.
All right.
It's basically an illicit drug. So.
Well, I mean, you would get kids that were fucking spazzes. So my guess was they weren't taking it and they were selling it. Because how else all these kids have so much money?
Or they were taking 4 when they should have taken 1.
Yeah,
that's another thing that could happen with Ritalin. But Ritalin can be useful for some people. They really do need it. Some people, Ritalin can be useful, but Botox even can be useful. Like when people are given certain injections in their throats to deal with certain throat problems that you can have with Botox, that is treated with Botox. That can be useful, but we're misusing all these things.
Yeah,
most of the time.
When Arthur buys 1,000 tabs and doesn't put it into the locker, the evidence locker, instead he ends up taking all 1,000 tabs of that.
Right.
Yeah. He's gone. He's lost his It's a moral ideation, whatever it
because
is.
in the beginning he's basically saying like, I'm not really doing this, I'm just buying the things, and that's the moment.
Yeah, he's
where,
talking about maybe I'll take 2 and it'll be okay for the next couple of days. And that's where he starts. But then we find out 1,000 tabs have just disappeared.
Okay.
And he won't even say the number he takes during the day.
So I want to go through some of the themes that I have outlined for the way I organized quotes from the book. I have them organized under dope scene characters, substance D/new path, surreal 60s/90s, moments of horror, Fred and Bob, and then moments of humor, which there's less of than normal. There was less for me, but there are very funny moments. But
I mean, this isn't exactly your kind of jam, though, right? Like, so you don't have an insider view on this one. That's
right. Let's go through the dope scene characters. One of the first scenes that really worked for me was on page 40. And this is when they're kind of talking. This is when Barra starts talking about going to 7-Eleven to get the materials to make.
Oh, right.
This scene was very funny.
You get the solar cane? Is that what he's talking about, or is this after that?
He's like, I got a temporary lab set up at the house. I can create a better one. And they're talking the cocaine. They're talking about
an ounce of cocaine out of solar cane.
Yes. And like this whole scene where they go to the 7-Eleven and stuff like that. These are great examples of where he was talking about using real life experiences from his drug days. And I know for a fact in one of the letters, he mentions in a letter to Tim Powers that the bike scene was real. And it's interesting that ended up in the movie too. But
that's hilarious. To me, that's one of the funniest scenes.
And the bike scene, in his letter to Tim Powers, he said that whole bike conversation when somebody had stolen a bike, brought it over to his house, and they were all arguing about how many gears it had, and that's when he thought, like, this is a sign that I'm losing my mind, is that I can't even conceptualize this. So, to me, that's...
he put that in the book perfectly. It makes perfect sense. There's 7 gears.
Right.
By the way, I knew people who would get a cold from the local convenience store, and they would break open this inhaler for the cold. It was like basically a nasal inhalant to clear your sinuses. They would break it open and then eat this gunk inside it, and they would get really high because it had amphetamines in it. And they stopped making it that way when this got out. But this went on for quite a while. People were, why is everybody buying 5 or 6 of those cold medications? So he was on to something.
Like Whippets, it's like any of those.
And Whippets, right. Yeah. I had a few Whippet experiences.
Video head cleaner, because it would get you high. It was like a Whippet. But
that was a thing going around too. It was really, yes. And also the misuse of embalming fluid.
Yeah.
Somehow there was some way you could get high from embalming fluid, and people broke into mortuaries and stole it.
Yep.
So
the desperation to get high and escape from the misery of life.
Yeah.
So, well, if you're that miserable, you'll find anything to get out of it, right?
Yes,
like we used to just steal the Robitussin and the NyQuil and then just drink that slowly throughout the evening and then just go wander around the beach. It's
Yeah. That's a good combination, though. The Robitussin DM.
You throw some Jolly Ranchers in there, Larry, you're set.
Well, and I have to say that San Diego gets a cameo in this book.
A couple of them.
Yeah.
The zoo and the city itself.
Yeah, Bob Arctor comes here for the $50 cephalopods. And it's funny because I guess that whole Southern California, this is the first time he was writing in Southern California, so it's the first time he really used it. Although he has mentioned, I know we've pointed out that he's mentioned San Diego before, and I know he married, I think they got married in Baja, California, right past DJ. So he had spent time down here before that. But as far as the dope scene character, I'm interested, Anthony, this is your first time reading Scanner Darkly, right? I know you've seen the movie, but what did you think of this depiction of this compared to drug characters you knew, like coming through your house in a different era, you know? Like,
Well, I think one of the biggest differences is I never heard any of my parents' friends say, "You're jiving me right now." But
right.
I think for me, it was pretty accurate. The longer we've been talking, the more I've been thinking about my mom's ex-boyfriend, who just really had a lot of disassembled bikes and bike parts in our garage. He created a whole workbench, had bikes hanging from the rafters, and it's funny because they're always
actually made a bike.
never actually made a bike. There's a shitload of bike chains, and it's always kids' bikes too. I don't know if you guys have ever been around. You see an adult driving around what is essentially a kid's bike. You're like, I know how you got that bike.
Yeah, it's like tweakers taking apart television.
Nutshell.
Yeah. And at one point, I went in the garage and found just a huge sack of doorknobs. Just a sack of doorknobs sitting in the garage, and a bunch of other stuff like random RC cars and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think Dick uses language to keep the reader a little bit from feeling how visceral some of those experiences can be. Like he says he soiled himself a lot, whereas, I very much remember how it's going to sound harsh, but how disgusting my mom became the further she got into her heroin addiction.
Right.
But I think personally, I think Dick did a good job representing it from an outsider's perspective. Right. I don't know how John or Larry feel, but.
Well, one thing.
Yeah, he had some space by that time. By the time he finished the book, he had some distance.
Yeah, but I would say one thing that I kind of got offended by in the book was going through recovery myself and being in a recovery home for a year. The depiction of the ex-drug addict employees at the recovery homes being assholes was not my experience. Not my experience in any way. Every ex-addict I've ever met has been supportive. And
right.
Never been like, dude,
you know why that? You know it was like that in Dick because he went to Synanon, and he went to that place Synanon where there was supposedly a rehab, and later a bunch of those guys were indicted for serious crimes.
Oh, really?
Look up Synanon, and you'll find out that they were just appalling. They became a cult, and they were brutal, and they brutalized people, and they were flaky. Their ideas were flaky, and they were awful. So Synanon was the basis of New Path in the novel.
Mm-hmm.
And then there also the addiction center in Canada was called Ex-Calais, and it was controversial there at the time too. It was
right. It was sort of that same sort of thing where in the interview that I have, the 79 interview, he talks about how they ratted people out and made you the villain and all that kind of stuff.
Right, that's totally Synanon. They did that. They were trying to be confrontation was going to help, The
one in Canada
committed suicide.
Clearly, by the 90s, they abandoned that kind of bullshit.
Synanon was, in fact, in the 90s disbanded.
Yeah,
and some of those people were imprisoned.
Good.
And apparently, it was Phil called a suicide line, and then ended up at the one in Canada. It was after calling a suicide line, they referred him to this place in Canada. So
that's one thing I meant to ask you, David. You said that he had a serious suicide attempt. What was his method, and what made it serious?
Well, serious is that when I say serious is that I believe like he intended very seriously to complete the act. It wasn't a call for help. I can't remember.
So was it like like in the book? Was it like take a bunch of reds and die and?
Yes, and there was some reason like it.
Yeah, that might have been a parody of making fun of his own thing.
Yeah, of what happened to him. Yeah.
Yeah. He's talked about it, that there was some like weird fluke for why it didn't work. And you know, when he talks about it as in, I tried very hard to die at that point. And so he was serious about it. So I don't know, unless you guys have anything else on the dope scene characters, I'm gonna move on.
I do. I have a couple of quotes that made me take this book seriously, and they're sort of right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain, I think everyone that's been in the drug scene at any time has their certain triggers that they know someone's telling the truth when they say certain things.
Right.
So he says, I'm in the like 4 novel thing, so I'm not going to give you page numbers. Now and then a dealer, realizing he was about to be busted, took refuge in one of the drug rehabilitation places. And when I was in a recovery home, I had 3 drug dealers that never did drugs, but were in recovery, so they didn't go to prison. And to me, that was ultimately realistic.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because, that's a detail I wouldn't have caught.
And here's the other one, is one of the characters, I can't remember who, says, but shit, I'm down so low now that it's like a matter of days. And also, I think I'm being ripped off. I can't be taking them that fast. Somebody must be pilfering from my fucking stash. I've heard that so many times. I've even felt that before when I've, been on drugs. Like, how did we go through this so fast? Like an 8-ball, you do, and you're like, what? How did we?
What the hell? Yeah, time. Yes, time dilation, subjective time dilation.
I think Carrie
And
has
this
that
novel has
experience.
You want to forget, you want to forget that you did the drugs so you can complain about how you needed more. It's just a weird psychosis that you.
Yes, yeah, and we see that in this novel, and just the whole subjective state of mind that, like, the world of being in that kind of condition, he really evokes that there's and that's kind of like the right brain and the left brain. The left brain is objective, the right brain is subjective. Can be very creative, but also it's subjective, and you can create your own world of delusion in there.
Yep. Those are the kinds of things that in this book made me like see that this is realistic. This is real drug addiction to me. This is the things people do.
Hey, it's not me this time with barking dogs.
It's my newly adopted dog. It hasn't learned how to be on podcasts yet.
Well, welcome, Patchy. But all right, so Anthony, do you have anything else on the drug scene characters, or I'm going to go on to Substance D?
No, I think we've pretty much covered that.
Okay, so the first thing that I noticed with Substance D is 5 pages in, and I love this scene where he's driving past the thrifty drugstore, and they have a huge window display, bottles of Slow Death, cans of Slow Death, jars and bathtubs and vats and bowls of Slow Death, millions of caps and tabs and hits of Slow Death. He's having this fantasy that he could go to Thrifty and get them, right? And it's not real, but he's having this, like, image, and then it says, and there's a sign that says, "Your credit is good here. Not to mention low prices, lowest in town." And then on the next page, he wondered when and how they unloaded a 50-pound bag of Substance D. So he actually starts like thinking about like
he goes from full fantasy mode on that.
Exactly. And then on the next page it says, to survive in this fascist police state, he thought, you got to always be able to come up with your name at all times. And so, like, this whole scene was great. I loved it.
That to me is hilarious. Yeah, you really have to know your own name.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one.
Yeah. I loved this scene. This set the stage for me. This was like one of the underrated great moments of the novel, starting from early on, that just really won me over. So I thought that was great.
And
First two chapters are great.
knowing your name though, Arctur is also Fred,
Yeah.
and he's got more than one name. He's more than one person. He doesn't really know who he is.
Yeah,
No,
but
he
it's
ends up being Bruce at the end. He doesn't even really know that name either.
Yeah.
it's foreshadowing, and it's a great setup for eventual payoff, which we know a lot of times because Phil writes from the seat of his pants. A lot of times he doesn't know where he's going with things. Makes me wonder if that's a second draft.
Yeah.
It seems
I would think so.
Yeah, it seems like it would be second draft. Something that he added, or I guess he said he did 11 drafts, so it could have been 8th draft for all we know.
No, he did. I thought he did 11 drafts of Flow My Tears.
Flow, yeah. But he said he did several drafts of Scanner. So, and then on page 31 is the first time that Substance D is labeled as that it wasn't synthetic, that it was synthetic, that it was not organic, and I thought that was really key kind of part that.
It's a good twist at the end.
Right, because it is organic. Eventually, we learn that they're growing it there, and so I thought that was kind of a key, kind of important part. Page 38 is the first time that they really talk about New Path, and I love that Charles Freck says, "Well, the first thing they do when you go to New Path," Charles Freck said, "is they cut off your pecker as an object lesson, and then they fan out in all directions from there." So they start by. So
that wasn't Barris that said that? I thought that was Barris that said that.
Freck who says it.
Yeah, of course. Even in the story, that isn't true. That's Freck's weird little fantasy.
Yeah, and I also liked on that page he says a person grows more spleens over the years.
Oh, that's Barris.
No, it's Freck.
No, it's Barris.
Yeah, it's Barris.
Oh, Barris says that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Barris saying all the weird stuff about the recovery.
Yeah. And then
he's freaking Freck out.
Right. And then there's some really great stuff around there. That's right before the scene where they go to 7-Eleven to make cocaine from.
Yeah, that's when they're in the diner talking to Patty or not Patty.
Yeah. The next thing I have is on page 115, which is a scene about the split brain. In many of those taking substance D, a split between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain occurs. And that's when, Fred is he's having a conversation with his boss, and then the guy's trying to explain to him the split in the brains, and he says, I really like that Fred says, he basically asks him, if you noticed anything in me, right? And I thought that was a key moment, because just that question of him saying, have you noticed anything? It's starting to show the signs of his paranoia kind of growing.
Oh yeah. He's not aware of it himself is definitely a sign that something's wrong.
Yeah, and the split brain thing comes back up again in 2:18 and 19. That's how far. It's almost 100 pages between when it's introduced and when it gets real serious.
Yeah, when he takes the first test and then the second test, right?
Right. So there's 100 pages in between, which I think is interesting. And then you have the two hemispheres of my brain. Fred says the two hemispheres of my brain are competing. Yes. Why? Well, substance D, it often causes that functionally. And then this is the whole scene where he's had the test, and he's having the discussion.
Yeah.
And
with the text. Yeah.
And really, the thing that I wanted to highlight is that there's 100 pages between when this is introduced.
We see the fall. We see his descent into this dichotomous nature. Where he's becoming more and more pissed off at this Bob Arctur character,
right?
And separating more and more as he watches him on the scanner, and he's like, this guy's a total fucking creepazoid.
Yeah, he gets very third person about Bob Arctur.
Yeah. And that was fascinating to me. To me, that was the kind of the best part.
Yes, and I love that on 219, there's just a line where he says, "I will never drop substance D again." for the rest of my life, right? It's like that's the moment where he's like saying like fuck this shit, right? And it's that.
Yeah, but he's also full of shit.
Of course he's full of shit.
Any addict that says they're never going to do a drug again,
right,
is full of shit.
Well, you know, you can eventually get to where you can be pretty confident in it. But if you're right at the beginning when you're just saying, okay, I'm stopping now.
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah, that's pretty full of shit. You know, it's not so easy.
Well, that's that's why AA, NA, and all that use one day at a time.
One day at a time. Yeah, that's right.
Know,
that's right.
It's supposed to be just as long
there's
as
a place called Smart Recovery, and they use it too.
And you don't look too far down the line. Because if you look too far down the line, you're going to see yourself doing drugs.
And then
or
the last
drinking or whatever it is.
And then it's 246 and 47 is when he arrives at New Path. The thing about the New Path entry, the thing that really hit me on that scene was, you know, the staff person, the first thing the staff person says to Donna is, "What is it?" Not "who is it?" It's "what is it?" And then she says, "a person." And then the New Path person says, "Substance D." She nods, and then she says, "It ate his head, another loser." Okay?
But see, that's it. I mean, to me, and I'm probably not going to be popular with this opinion, but to me, that's a separate short story. To me, the novel ends and she drops him off. Because she goes her own way. We know he's going to get the recovery he needs. That's the end of the novel.
Well, the revelation about where Substance D is coming from and the closed circuit sort of situation with, you know, new path causing the addiction that then it is curing you of. You know,
I'm going to agree with
that. Is a pretty important. That is a pretty important, let's say, climactic revelation.
But it should have been integrated into the novel and not just thrown at the end.
I don't see what you're saying at all, Larry. But in my opinion,
because you think everything should be separate.
No, I think this totally fits with the novel. I mean,
it doesn't. It's a drug book, and then it's a story of a different character receiving recovery and finding out that there's a source of the drug.
Well, no, Bruce is just the like mind-fucked version of Bob Archer that doesn't even know.
But he has no personality. He is nothing.
Well, that's part of that
slate.
It's part of the destruction.
So he's not Bob Archer. He's just a nothing.
Well, Bob Archer doesn't exist anymore, and that's what they're saying. Is that
that's kind of his sad arc. That's what makes it so tragic to me.
Thank you.
Is that he really does become.
But he already has that arc prior to that.
All right. All right. So one thing I want to say is that the New Path residence is in Santa Ana. And I like that on the next page they say, later on, I think we'll transfer you to the island or one of the farms. First, you have to go through the dish pans. And that's when they mention like the animals and the whole thing. And there is a line here, John. This isn't Synanon. They don't let you smoke. Right?
Yeah, they do mention Synanon a couple of times in there. I thought it was fictional, but
yeah, I thought it was fictional too. I didn't know it was real until John mentioned it. So the next.
But I do want to point out that we have kind of overlooked some of the more unfortunate aspects of the fact when they send Arctur to New Path, he's basically let go from his position because he's an addict, right?
Yeah.
And
it's sort of catch-22, isn't it?
Well,
you have to do drugs, but you did it on your own, so
it's your fault, which then leads to when he's sitting down talking to I believe it's Hank, and Hank says, "No, read your penal code. An officer who willingly becomes an addict and does not promptly report it is subject to misdemeanor charge, a fine of $3,000 and/or 6 months. You'll probably just be fined." What?
It's very
you guys sent me to this job knowing this might happen, but then you didn't tell me it was my job to then tell you that I got addicted to the very thing that you told me I was investigating that I had to report on myself.
Hey, remember, ignorance of the law is no excuse.
That is such governmental bureaucratic bullshit that I feel it's absolutely 100% accurate.
Yeah.
And it ties into what I do love about the New Path stuff at the very end in that final chapter that I know didn't work for Larry, but it all seems to represent how cyclical and tied in everything is. Arctor is addicted to a substance that's being produced by this place that is creating the substance to get them addicted to generate their business, which is then being, I feel like the government or the police department knows about this, and it all just feels so horribly cyclical and depressing.
Now,
And I haven't.
Let me
It's not
read
clear that they know about it, but it may be at upper. They keep. He hints at some point that at the upper levels, who knows what they know, but so Donna apparently is a federal agent, but totally different, but from apparently a different agency than the others.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So it's unclear to me what she knows about that, but
He's like a NSA or something along those lines. Something.
yeah, there's a sort of fog of war that is covering the whole book.
But I do want to reiterate that I don't have a problem with the storyline itself that they tell at the end. It's the separation from the main body of the novel that bothers me. It's not integrated.
It would have been hard to do, probably. He did his best.
I'm okay with hard to do.
I think what I'm getting at though is it all feels so very hopeless. When I finished this, I haven't felt this depressed finishing a book since I finished 1984.
But it's a good hopeless, right? It's like a reaffirming kind of we're all in the same boat kind of hopelessness. As far as
that has never made me feel good ever.
I know what you mean.
It's like saying the ship's sinking, but we're all on it together, right? Yeah, but we're still gonna fucking drown.
The end of 1984. He loved Big Brother.
Well,
to me, Animal Farm is.
I went for a walk and had a cigarette after I read that
book. Well, right, but there is a sense, I think, at the end of the book that Arctor is going to find his way out, away from New Path, and recover, and even expose them. I think there's a hint of that. I'll have to look up the exact pages to find it at some point, but
he recognizes the plants.
Sure, and he has a plan to, and he puts it in. It hints that he's going to tell people about it.
All right, so
and he wants, and he really does want to get clean and stay clean.
All right, so the next section is going to be surreal 60s/90s. So, and I love this line on page 29 where he describes Anaheim. I think this is really, every once in a while we get Phil commenting on life in a cool way, and I love this. Life in Anaheim, California was a commercial for itself, endlessly replayed. Nothing changed. It just spread out farther and farther in the form of neon ooze. I loved that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you probably didn't go to Anaheim in the 70s, but I was there quite a bit going to Disneyland when I was a kid. And man, that place was ugly. It was just nothing but neon and shitty motels, and it's not the greatest city on the planet. Let's put it
that way. It is it's a city based on exploiting addiction.
Yeah.
So one of the ways one of the ways that we have this surreal 60s feel is just like some of the dialogue. Page 136, she probably says the dude owes her bread, right? And but I love, there's the scene where they're trying to steal stamps, and there's the whole thing with
stamp machine.
The stamp machine. That's on the next page, 137, and that's another sign that he was just like, I don't care if this looks like the future or not. I just don't care. And
I don't think he was trying to make it look like the future.
Yeah, and we can tell that Judy Del Rey tried.
He needed for the story.
Right. Yeah, this stamp machine thing also was just about the state, again, the ag state of mind. And, yeah, I'm going to take this, I'm going to sell it. I'm going to put all these stamps in a shopping basket and sell it, and it's going to be great. And also there's perhaps some kind of symbolism having to do with the stamps emitting from the federal government. And she's an agent working for the federal government. What's up with that?
Exactly.
Now, I may be overthinking page 204, okay? But considering my theory on the whole, like, PKD's just a surrealist more than a science fiction writer, and that he's just creating these alternate worlds, and he's very specifically wants them to be alternate worlds instead of the future. I don't know what's going on this page, but on 204, Arthur said, "I wonder whose face is on the hysterical $5 bill." Well, that was our most hysterical president, Bill Falks. He only thought he was the president. And when did he think he served? He imagined he served 2 terms around 1882. Later on, after a lot of therapy, he came to imagine he only served 1 term. This whole thing just confused the shit out of me when I read it. I was like, what is he trying to say here with this other non-Lincoln guy and this hysterical $5 bill? I have no idea what it means. I was absolutely confused.
Oh, that was hilarious. The hysterical, who's on the hysterical $5 bill?
Right. It was funny. But I just like.
Yeah, that is probably something that is supposed to be make you wonder what it's about.
It's like a
it
real.
might even be a private joke.
Right. Right.
Lincoln was never hysterical.
So, anyways, so that's all I have on the weird surreal 60s versus like, and that whole hysterical $5 bill thing.
There's a lot more than that. I mean, they talk about having a lid.
Sure.
It might be just
2 lids of pot and stuff like that.
It might be actually, he really is referring to Lincoln, but they have imagined this other guy, and it's all a fantasy, and they're just in their minds they see it that way.
Yeah, I know there's a lot more of this surreal 60s thing. It's just those are the scenes that really stuck out to me. But I actually really like this time out of joint feeling, just because I think that's one of the most Phil Dickian things, is that it is not in the future, that it is just in this Phil Dick reality. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of the adaptations are missing.
Well, yeah, Man in the High Castle, right?
Right. Exactly.
And so I think I don't know if he invented the kind of alternate future and it's our future and it's not thing, our world it's not. I'm not sure if he did. Maybe he did, but it sure has been borrowed a lot.
All right, so the next section that I have is moments of horror in this book, and there's a lot of those, starting with page 1.
Yeah, right.
with the bugs and the introduction, and clearly this is an evocative scene, and this is one of, and I think, I don't know how you guys feel, but I think this is one of his best opening scenes, of his whole career, because I can't.
Well, every time we start a new book, I think of Anthony every time I read the first 2 pages.
Right.
Excuse me? What?
Because your hatred of all those early books with their boring.
Okay, hate is a strong word.
Well, yeah, you used it.
But time out of joint is a little hard to get into, okay? It starts at a fucking grocery store, he's stacking potatoes.
From that, I always pay attention to the opening chapter, or the opening couple of pages, and say,
I'm just a firm believer.
Boring.
So, yeah, the bug scene is obviously really horrific. It's something that he obviously, his roommate that inspired Jerry Fabian.
Delusional parasitosis.
Yeah, so we already talked about that a little bit, but it's early in the it's early in the book. But to me, one of the most horrifying scenes is of the Mariner edition is 179, and this is where he can't quite make out who's Connie and who's Donna. And yeah,
right.
And to me, that's one of the most, because that's a great indication that he's losing his mind.
Right.
You know what's real.
Well, the best part about that is he sees it on the tape or on the scanner, right?
Yeah.
but he doesn't recognize himself as Arctur seeing it at the same time.
Yeah.
That he's potentially seeing the same delusion as himself. He sees it as another. He says, if Arctur saw it, it has to be real because we both saw it. Instead of I'm Arctur and I saw it at that time. He claims that it's two different people seeing the same thing.
Right. And I've actually had people refer to the bug scene as being funny to me, and I was like, wow.
It was funny to me, but
yeah, I don't know. It's that's
Yes and no.
It's dark humor and it's on the line, and a lot of the things in here, like, to me, the funniest scene in the book is Freck's suicide.
Well, to me, the funniest scene is the multi-eyed alien reading
that's good too.
reading all the sins.
Right, that is good too.
That takes us to the 6th grade when you discovered masturbation.
Right. And the other really horrifying scene to me is 280 and 81, which is the scene where Bruce is being told what to do, and he's just kind of repeating everything back. And that's a really horrifying scene where he's just like, he's lost all semblance of who he is.
Of individuality, yeah.
Individuality. He's no longer Arctur. He's now Bruce. He now just agrees to everything.
It's almost infantilism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really great scene of just, he's absolutely officially lost his mind. So, and then the next section I have is Fred and Bob, and I think the first really good scene for that one is page 46. I have been for some time conjecturing as to who Bob Arctur is really employed by, which we mentioned earlier. Mentioned the scene earlier, but I thought that was great. That's the first two was Bob. Page 58 and 59 is where he's given the assignment, and that's the scene where he's like, "What about Arctur?" Where Hank's like, "What about Arctur?" In that whole scene where
What about him?
yeah, what about him? And then Fred says, "Arctur's not doing much." This whole scene is great. And then.
It was pivotal for me. I was like, oh, there's the story right there.
Yeah.
Beforehand, it was good, but it was all character, it was all environment. And then when you throw in, you now have to watch yourself and report on yourself. There's a story.
And very slyly on page 61 is the first suggestion of bugging the house. Fred says, "Does this mean you'll be bugging his house?" And that's the introduction of the holographic system and the scanners per the title and all that. Page 109 is the first time he reports on himself. And I love Fred says, "I report on myself all the time." Right?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And he talks about erasing things, the bulk erasing device, and then not knowing what's erased and what isn't. And then Hank basically says to him in that whole scene, like, I know you're either Jim Burris, Ernie Luckman, Charles Freck, or Donna Hawthorne. I know you're one of them.
Right.
And then...
But really, he knew the whole time who he was.
Yeah, he knew who he was at that point. And then the line got blurred.
No, Hank. Hank knew.
Oh, yeah. But he didn't know that Hank knew.
Right.
So, page 162.
I also like that we never find out who Hank is.
Yeah.
It could just be, somebody we never met, obviously, but I kind of want it to be someone that we met at some point.
Yeah. On page 162 is where Donna says the whole thing about, hey, what about going to Oregon and leaving this all behind? Which was a key scene. And then
well, that whole scene is heartbreaking.
Yeah, because she says something about, have you ever seen real snow? And she's like, I mean real snow, not...
No, the part where he's like, I'll go with you. I'll go to Oregon with you. And she just straight up says, no.
Yeah. And then...
like everything, he's been trying to build this relationship between them so he can, he wants her to be his girlfriend. He actually has honest feelings about this person. Probably the only person he has honest feelings about.
Yeah.
in his entire life, and she shuts him down every time.
Right.
Although she, as an agent, she doesn't want to have to give up sex.
We find that out later,
Yeah.
but at that time we're just
At first, all along until then, I thought that that she was just really drugged up and neurotic and couldn't bear to be touched. But no, that was
it turns out there's an actual reason for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is really pretty good writing here on page 164.
And that's also the tragic part. It's almost Shakespearean in that sense that, she had feelings for him, he had feelings for her, but that could never be, because before that could become a thing where they find out they're both agents, he loses his identity, and therefore they can't be together ever. It has that sort of Shakespearean feel to it.
Yeah, and the whole the scene, the actual touch of her, he says in 164, the actual touch of her lingered inside his heart. What remained in all the years of his life, the long years without her, with never seeing her, hearing from her, knowing anything about her, if she was alive, happy, or dead. What touch stayed locked within him, sealed in himself, and never went away. That one touch of her hand. It was pretty good writing there. And then
Tragic.
190 is I know Bob Arctor. He's a good person. He's up to nothing, at least nothing unsavory. In fact, he works for the Orange County Sheriff's Office covertly, which is probably, and then he has, this is him thinking to himself while Burris is in the office, right? Burris is like performing on him. And then there's like German for no reason. Barris, yeah. And then there's German for no reason. I have no idea what it means.
Does anybody know? Do we know what any of that German is?
Nope.
Because I just pass over.
He translates some of it.
Yeah.
He does, but very little, ultimately.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Tolkien's songs. I just pass over that German.
I thought it might have been Goethe, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I can't do it.
Somebody recently told me that they had translated it or something, but I can't remember who. Somebody in the community. But anywho, yeah, and then 198 is when he knows he's being watched, and he's becoming more and more strange. I can see now what that informant who phoned in about him meant. That's when he's like, wow.
That's when Fred's watching him with the book, right? With the sex book.
Yeah, and then there's another scene that Barris comes back in, and there's another informing scene on 213.
When they arrest him.
Yeah, and then
that's a great scene. I mean, that I'm big time into revenge stories, and that to me is like a mini revenge story right there, that Barris finally gets what he deserves.
Yeah. And then 229 is where he starts like, hey, maybe I should rip the scanners out. The surveillance, he thought, essentially should be maintained. He's trying to decide, am I going to give myself up if I start pulling out scanners? But
right, piece by piece.
Right. And then 237.
He's a trapped animal at that point. Yeah. He knows that he's fucked. And there's no way out. So he just starts scheming with the most impossible plans he can come up with.
Yeah. And 237 is the page where he just loses it. He's talking to Donna, or he's trying to get Donna's phone number. He's talking to Hank. And then Hank says, I pieced it together a long time ago. You're Arctor. And then he says, I'm who? Staring at Hank in the scramble suit facing him. I'm Bob Arctor. He could not believe it. It made no sense to him. It did not fit anything he had done or thought. It was grotesque. And then he's trying to get Donna's number. So he doesn't even know who he is, but he knows Donna's who he wants to reach out to, which is interesting.
Yeah, he's trying to give Hank Donna's phone number, but he can't remember it. Okay. And also, doesn't he call Arctor like a scumbag or something in that scene? He calls him like something along those lines, where he's just like, no, there's no way I can be that scumbag.
Right, and that's let's see. Yeah.
What about the big quote at near the beginning? if I had known it was harmless, I would have killed it myself. I mean, that's
Right.
a famous quote from this book. That's to me, that as a quote, that's great. I would put that on a wall.
All right, so
Yeah, that embodies something. It embodies some kind of deeply cynical attitude.
Yeah,
that is
I can't.
institutionalized.
Yeah, I couldn't even define it as why it was important, but I know he focuses on it as sort of a joke that they pass around to each other, an inside joke, but it is profound. It has a profundity that I can't describe.
Yeah, it is satirizing the attitude of the worst of power brokers and powerful people in society. Their attitude is crush them even if you don't need to.
Right. Even if they're harmless.
So, yes, I mean that is the implicit attitude, and wouldn't surprise me if it were a saying amongst them.
You wouldn't extend that to full all out human nature.
Well, not everybody's. No, otherwise I would have killed myself a long time ago.
Yeah,
But
that's fair to say that a lot of us would if that was.
but it's no. People. There are some people who are more aware and conscious than other people, and innately empathetic. They are hope. They are hope. They are light in the darkness. But unfortunately, powerful people, very powerful people, not all of them. There are some good, powerful people in history, but often powerful people tend to be super cynical and will do anything to make sure that they remain in power.
I think that the fact that it was said innocently by a character, she didn't have any intention for it to be profound.
Right.
It was just her nature that made that come true. She was a rich girl that was sort of playing in this other world, and
was that Donna? Was that Donna?
No, it was another girl, a neighbor.
Connie.
Oh, it was Connie.
Connie? Okay.
No,
it wasn't.
So we've done.
Connie's the one in bed, right?
She's like a whore or something.
Yeah, it's not Connie. It's a neighbor girl that's only in that one scene.
Okay, well, John, you're specific. You were always on my radar because you have one of these novels with wet bones, and just from your perspective, like, how did you relate to reading this novel this time? Because you said you read it the first time in the 70s.
Well, I feel like I said earlier, a kind of intense connection to it. And my novel, Wet Bones, it was like central conceit of it is there is in real life a Hindu myth about an astral parasite that feeds on people who are addicted, and it's like as big as a boa constrictor almost. Kind of wraps around you, and you can't see it, but it's there. It's transparent, can't see it, and it's feeding off all this kind of spiritual energy that you lose when you succumb to addiction, and then it eats that, and that was my metaphor, and for him it's substance D, but I just felt like something was eating away at me in my life when I was addicted, and it was something that was basically out of my control, and there was this feeling that it was encouraging me it was actually just a little section of my brain that was being wrongly used, because that's what happens with drugs, but it was encouraging me to succumb to this thing for its own benefit. It was sub-personality or something, and some wiring in my brain, and the Akishra represented that, and to me it was terrifyingly real. But there was also a spiritual way of battling it, a spiritual response to it that is also brought into Wet Bones. I'm much more open about that than PKD is in his science fictional novel about it, and I believe that the way out of things like addiction, besides just hanging on a day at a time and building up enough time so that your brain chemistry and wiring has a chance to heal, that's the first thing you have to do. But staying clean is about building up consciousness. And Dick also had this kind of yearning in him for a transcendent state with relation to the universe, and it comes out in the Archer, Timothy Archer, books, story, and
that's coming up soon.
And so and there was, and I think that it was not all entirely hallucinatory. Some of it was, some of it was perhaps a result of a stroke, but it was so profoundly worked up in him that it seemed to me in line with some of the visions of the great mystics of the ages. And there was something real there that he was in touch with. And it was being interpreted in these stories, and sometimes the stories he told himself about it. Because that's what we have to work with. We have our own inner mythology, and our own filters, and whatever symbols that we were raised with, and so we interpret it that way. But it's something much more ineffable. It's the Atman, they call it in Hindu, and it is beyond being described. So we fall back on these other kinds of descriptions like he did. But he was onto something. However, and he was, even way back when he was a drug addict, he had some moments where he saw, the veil dropped, and he knew there was something more. And he alludes to it at least one place in the book, and I wish I'd marked it. I don't have it.
What's the idea?
In a scanner darkly. He alludes to the sense of another world where something is meaningful and powerful, and like a little door opens and he glimpses it.
Oh, that's the a character Donna is talking about, who saw God, spoke to God, and God offered a door to him that was there for a week, or it was closed for most of the time, but then it opened for a couple of days. But he never stepped through it because
he never went through it, and it's like
so amazed at the beauty of it.
Right, and it's like C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, where people are offered a chance to leave hell, and there's a bus there waiting for them to take them out of hell. It's a bus ride from hell to heaven, and they just the spirits in the bus say, "Come on, you want to go?" And they make excuses. "Oh no, I've got business to attend to. I have to meet a guy in the third circle of misery, and I just don't have time to." But a few of them do. A few of them get on the bus and they go there, and they go through this painful transfiguration. And then something like that. This guy didn't go through the door, and Dick eventually accepted the necessity of leaving hell and finding that painful transfiguration and going through it. I think he made it most of the way, enough so that he changed his life in a lot of ways.
I think we're all at some point or another offered that bus to heaven in some kind of metaphorical way, but there aren't a lot of people that take that bus.
Right. Lou Reed has songs about that in the latter part of his life. He has a song he refers to going through the fire to the light, and it's all about it. It's all about recovery.
All right, and I do want to say, I'm going to hold up Wet Bones for those on YouTube. We're both Wet Bones.
I feel like I should read that.
You should. I've been saying forever. Wet Bones is what I consider to be the greatest. It's my number one horror novel of all time. I think it's a masterpiece. I think, John, there's a raw anger and energy to it that is kind of one of a kind.
That sounds like recovery.
Yeah, and I think it comes out of what you're going through. But anyways, so I think now.
So there's one other thing, if anybody has anything to say about this, the title itself, which ties into the title of David's favorite.
So, all right, so we got to get into our final thoughts. And Larry, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind. I'm first of all, I'm going to give it its grade, which is I'm giving it 4.5 hash pipes. The reason it doesn't get 5 is because I honestly feel like the last section should have been scattered throughout the novel. It would have tied in better for me if it had been a complete story instead of a separate story at the end. That's it. I mean, that's the only thing. If it had ended with him going into the rehab, I would call it one of the best drug books of all time. And even at this point, it's one of the best drug books of all time. And there's a lot of good drug books out there, and I've read a lot of them because it's an interesting subject to me, and it's something I've been around my whole life. So it's familiar. It's familiar to me. And the characters were so much better in this than his characters have been in the past. I mean, he's obviously had some great characters, but these people were so much more rounded and human that it's a stark difference, really, between this and Flow My Tears and even the books written around the same time. It was just, I so much want to give this 5, but I just can't.
Just do it. Just give it 5, Larry.
4.5.
All right, John, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Well, I think it's one of his greatest works, and I think it should have been marketed to the mainstream. And I think that it's more than just a book about drug abuse, although that's an important aspect of it. Drug abuse is the lens through a glass darkly. It's the lens that of stinging social commentary and speculation about how far government surveillance could go. Recently it was this is true, not in from some crank site or something. With the IRS is planning to use facial recognition systems.
They've already started.
They're planning to use them as a requirement that you have to send photos of your face and to be entered into a facial recognition program in order to pay your taxes. And I'm not as paranoid about these things as a lot of people are, but it just shows that Dick knew that while there are good things about government, I'm not an anti-government person, but he knew that it can also be the tentacled monster, and some of those tentacles might need to be lopped off, and that is an important subtext here too. So that's all I have to say for it, except I would give it 4.5 stars also.
Yeah, I think it's as I get older, the surveillance state means less and less to me, because I am no longer doing anything that I need to.
That's right. That is a fact. I've had the same thought.
All right, so I'm gonna, no surprise, give it 5 out of 5 $100 refrigerated jars of White Crosses. I think it is as close to perfect as Dick has written really since Three Stigmata or Man in the High Castle. Scanner Darkly is, and I think it's his best character work, and I guess we have Judy Del Rey to thank for that. So, Anthony.
So, I know Larry's just burning to hear what I have to say. I'm gonna give this 4.5 kinky freak mother bastards out of 5. I think it has entered the realm of one of my top favorite Dick novels, alongside the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch and Clans of the Alphane Moon, both of which are, as everyone knows, my 2 other favorite Dick novels of all time.
Yep.
I think that I agree with what both Larry and John have said. But I also really think that Dick does an incredible job of blurring the lines of reality in between the 2 different, Bob Arctor and and everybody else. There were certain moments where I couldn't really tell whose POV I was in, and I feel like that confusion was deliberate.
Yes, it was a device.
Yeah, and I think it's done pretty masterfully in this book.
Yeah,
I love the end. I know Larry didn't. It really drove the point home for me. And
I didn't say I didn't like it. I just wanted it integrated. That's all.
Well, I know what he means.
I know what you mean too, Larry. And for a second, I thought I was reading a totally different story when I first started, when I got to that part. But then I realized that it's still Arctur named Bruce. So yeah, 4.5 out of 5. I loved it. I think I'll probably reread it at some point because I'm sure there's stuff that I missed. And yeah, so 4 out of 5 for me.
Awesome.
4.5 out of 5, excuse me.
All right, we're almost done. We have only one last thing to do, and that's our Dicklike Suggestions for this month. Anthony, do you have a Dicklike?
I have none. Keep talking.
All right, I will do my Dicklike Suggestions really quick. I have 2, one of which we just recorded an episode about, which is Lee Brackett. Lee Brackett's The Big Jump, which we did as a Dick Adjacent episode because it was Do-Si-Do with the Solar Lottery, Philip K. Dick's debut. And for those who don't know, Lee Brackett was a screenwriter and the queen of the space operas in the 40s and 50s.
And she was an excellent writer. I read her space operas recently, and they were just wonderful.
Yes, and The Big Jump.
Stand up.
Have you ever read The Big Jump, John?
Yes, I read all of her books.
Yeah, The Big Jump is great because it's like psychological horror meets. It has like real grand themes and stuff, and it's great. And the other book I want to recommend this month, and that's Dangerous Visions and New Worlds. That's this new nonfiction book about the new wave of science fiction. It's a great nonfiction book. There's some holes. The Barry Maltzberg article is awfully short. There's not enough about John Brunner. There's only a little bit about Spinrad. And there's a certain person who's on this call whose books should have been represented more in it.
I'm a little less in the new wave thing. If you're talking about that, I was kind of proto cyberpunk but
it says it goes through 85, and I'm sorry, sir, but Transmaniacon and City Come a Walkin' were definitely books that should have been covered in this.
Yes, book. I agree. I agree. They should have been. Michael Moorcock was a big, important person in that scene.
Yes, and so Dangerous Visions and New Worlds by Andrew Nettie and Ian McIntyre. John, do you have a Dick-like suggestion? Philip K. Dick related media book or anything?
I think that people who have not seen the movie A Scanner Darkly, or even if they did see it when it came out in 2006, should go back and rewatch that. I rewatched it yesterday, and my appreciation for it only expanded.
I watch it about once a year. It's that good.
Yeah. And it's amazing how faithful it is, but we'll do a whole episode on that. All right, Larry, you're the last Dick-like suggestion, and then we'll preview what's coming up next.
Let me see if I can find my suggestion here. My suggestion is, of course, a video game called Superliminal. It's a dreamlike game that's based on spatial relations and our perception of reality. There's a couple of games like this, but I like this one because of its humor, and it sort of has similar themes to whatever that is, the Stanley Parable and stuff like that, where it's humorous but also has great gameplay. You're basically a person who ends up in a dream state,
right?
You can control different objects, and they grow and shrink depending on their relation to you and to the rest of the world.
Yeah. I read a review of it, a really enthusiastic review in the Washington Post. And
there's also a game called Maquette
review.
from a different company, which is basically the same thing. It has a similar gaming engine technique.
I wonder how many of these would exist if Phil Dick had never existed.
Exactly. Like
Right.
that's exactly what made me think of him when I was playing it. Was, I mean, I don't know how Dick would feel about video games. We've talked about that before, but if he was into them, I think this would be kind of one of his jams. He would like this one.
All right, Anthony, what have we got coming up next?
What is Valis? When a beam of pink light begins giving a schizophrenic man named Horselover Fat, who might also be known as Philip K. Dick, visions of an alternate Earth where the Roman Empire still reigns, he must decide whether he is crazy or whether a godlike entity is showing him the true nature of the world. We are doing Valis.
Awesome.
Valis, of course, is a big one. It's a huge one. So,
One of the biggest.
yeah. So this is pretty good back-to-back doing Scatter Darkly and Valis. So
Yeah, this is. I mean, I just want to reiterate, this book was fantastic.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I would love to hear one of our fans say they didn't like it, and the reasons why.
And give the reason why. Well,
Yeah.
and that's one of the sad things is that he was really in a zone at the end, that he was starting to really come together as a writer. And if we'd gotten another 20 years of Philip K. Dick writing,
Yeah, who knows what he would have created, you
Yeah.
know.
yeah,
But like he even said about this, he had finally found an editor that could improve his writing.
Yeah.
I mean, the third to the last novel he wrote, is that what this is? Something
Yeah.
like that? To
Yeah.
find an editor that truly gets you and can make you better at that time is tragic.
All right. So on that note, guys, good job, Scanner Darkly.
Thanks for doing it with us, John. It was great to meet
Yeah.
you and to
Thank you.
talk drugs with you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, John. And for
Drug Talk. Welcome to Drug Talk with Larry and John. And the special guest, Anthony.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
and the straight edge guy being confused. So. All right, folks. So as always, keep it paranoid. Stay paranoid, and
Be paranoid.
we'll see you at that.
Earth. We form the demons inside, imprint by imprint and etching at a time. Day by angry, fearful day, decisions coated in grime. We are becoming